The horrors of Canada's residential school system have long been absent from Ontario classrooms. Joining us now on their efforts to change that, Theodore Fontaine. He is the author of Broken Circle, The Dark Legacy of Indian Residential Schools, a memoir. He's also a member of the Saugeen Anishinaabe First Nation. And two guests from the international educational organization Facing History and Ourselves, Leora Schaefer, director in the Toronto office, and Cheryl Payne-Stevens, program associate. And as I welcome everybody here, let's just also point out Stolen Lives is the latest contribution your organization is making to the topic at hand tonight. But tell us about the organization, first of all, Facing History and Ourselves. What is that?
Right. So Facing History and Ourselves is an organization that supports educators as they bring some of the most complex histories into their classrooms. And we work to help those teachers engage their students deeply in historical case studies, looking at ultimately not only the dates and the places and the times, obviously very important, but engaging them emotionally and intellectually and ethically, and ultimately asking students to become involved, saying, when you learn about these histories, what does it do for you? Are you outraged? And if you are, what do you want to do to get involved? What are you going to do to participate?
Is this province-wide, country-wide, worldwide?
So we're working, it is. So we began 40 years ago, started in the United States, and now have grown. We have offices across the US, one in the UK, an office here in Toronto. And we're working deeply in Ontario. We also have a wonderful program in Manitoba, and with teachers across the country at a distance.
How many teachers have signed on?
So we have over 2,900 teachers in our teacher network. And if you think about each of those teachers reaching 100 students a year, we're reaching many, many Canadian students in this country.
How would your approach to teaching this information differ from what's in the current curriculum?
Well, I would say that it's how we support teachers in teaching what is in the curriculum. And so what we want students to be able to do, this, especially when history is difficult, when it's a sensitive topic, when it feels maybe perhaps controversial, that it may evoke strong emotions in our students, teachers have choices in how they can teach it. They can put on a PowerPoint, right? They can move quickly through it because it makes them nervous to teach it. Or they can, put on a film. We all live through those in our classrooms. What we want teachers is to go deep into the history, ask their students the difficult questions, open up for their students to ask those questions and engage them in a meaningful way in the content so that it's not rote memory, but actually it's about civic engagement.
And one more before we get the others involved. The purpose behind this is what?
The purpose, I would say, behind this is to deeply look at our own Canadian history. I grew up in Manitoba, and I was not taught this history in a deep way. We have generations of educators like myself who were not taught this history. And so we want to be part of the solution. We know that this needs to be taught. We need to be learning about the history of Indigenous peoples in this country, particularly the Indian residential schools. We saw that in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the calls to action, how important education is. And so we want to be in there. We want to be helping teachers teach content that's challenging. And so we provide both resources like Stolen Lives, but also professional development, knowing that teachers need the strategies and the support in teaching difficult history.
We have some of that history, that difficult history, sitting right beside you. And Theodore Fontaine, this is where I get you into this. Stolen Lives, what was your involvement with this?
Well, I was involved with Leora's organization here quite extensively at the end of this, but I don't think there was any ever intent for me to join the team. But I'm very happy to say that they placed a lot of emphasis on the oral history of residential schools. Like it's impossible to get the idea across of who we are as Indian people. And it's quite easy to look at history, the written history and anything that's available in the annals of Canadian activity. But to get the actual perspective of what really, really happened is quite impossible. So I'm very, very, very lucky, first of all, to have been approached by Leora to assist in developing the real story, I think, the real story of residential schools.
Well, you know the real story because you were in them, weren't you? Which residential schools were you in?
Well, In my book here is this one right here.
Broken Circle.
Yeah, the school you see here is the first school I attended for 10 years. And everything you've heard about residential schools, the bad stories you've heard happened.
And where was the one you were in?
Fort Alexander, a Saugeen First Nation. I was actually about 2 miles from my home and surrounded by, enclosed in a barbed wire fence, basically, and knowing that I was only 2 miles from home. So I spent almost 10 years there. And then my last 2 years were spent in the residential school in Winnipeg. Actually, I think it was an experiment to place Indian children into a large urban area. So I spent the last 2 years there, which was not bad. Not as bad as, well, what happened in the first one. Everything you've heard, all the bad stuff you've heard about residential schools, we were subjected to in this residential school.
So you were beaten.
Well, yeah,
you were humiliated.
I was sexually abused.
Sexually abused.
Pretty well everything you've heard.
You experienced.
I was hungry, extremely hungry at some points. Yeah. So everything you've heard is quite, personally, I think my colleagues and people that I went to school with know very well what happened. We've never been given the opportunity to actually tell Canadian society what it was like until this past 5-6 years with the TRC.
I'm going to ask everybody to look at the monitor up there because we're going to put a picture up. This is the Cross Lake Indian Residential School in Manitoba from 1940. Now, Theodore, you didn't attend that one, but, tell me if any of that looks familiar and why.
Very, very familiar. It's not complete. On the other side of this, the third seat that you see, were all the boys. And I think we had probably 4 or 5 more children on one side, as what you see here. And it was a complete isolation from our own families, our own sisters that attended residential school. And this is one of the few times that we got to mingle and talk to our people from our relatives. And it looks very familiar.
We'll put one more picture up, and then I want to get your feedback on that one, too. Let's do this one here. This is the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. This is Nova Scotia in the year 1929. Did these schools, I mean, we appreciate the horrifying things that happened in those schools, and we thank you for bringing those forward to our attention, which for many of us is the first time we're hearing about this. Did the schools, in your view, have any educational value whatsoever? Well,
what the picture you see here is Indian students participating in what do you do in a family situation or a community situation. We were utilized to do the work of the administrators of the school. Like the picture we see here is an exercise in sewing and darning. And
so do you want to call it slave labor?
It's labor. It's labor. We actually had a lot of us looked forward to the activity because it brought us together. Not the girls, but the boys. It was more of we got to listen to our radio, most times Lone Ranger and Tonto. But it gave us a little outlet, I think, from what our normal activity was during the school. So.
Cheryl, you do get to speak on this program. Here you go, it's your turn now. How would you characterize the way that the country's Indigenous history has been taught heretofore?
Not well, really. I think that's maybe part of the legacy of the government policy is, like Leora mentioned, that our own education hasn't been very good at this. So I think when I come to the classroom, that's one of the things I think as educators that we also kind of bring with us is that fear, are we going to do a good job of this? Because our education was substandard in that. And so that's something I think with a resource like Stolen Lives is helping teachers feel comfortable enough, but also acknowledging in the classroom, I tell the students, like one of the legacies is the fact that my education wasn't very good at this. And so now we need to kind of join together on this learning journey. And so students are, you'd think that they would get, kind of make fun of me. What do you mean you don't know, this history? But not at all. They're quite respectful of it and really excited to learn about this.
You're a high school teacher?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
So I work for the Peel District School Board.
Peel District, okay. And are the students genuinely interested in this stuff?
They are. At first, I think they're always shocked, right? Disbelief, like, surely this isn't Canada, right? They hear about how we're the best, one of the best countries to live in the world. And so I think it's really until they get to the grade 10 program, they find out about this history. And every semester we take them up to the Woodland Cultural Center up in Brantford, and it has the former residential school there, the Mohawk College. And so they're toured around with survivors. And, they come away, first of all, it's a difficult trip. But they also come away feeling very honored and privileged to have heard from survivors. I think our youth often don't feel, privileged or valued. And so the fact that a survivor would take the time and thank them for being a part of their healing journey, I think the kids come back really empowered and think, how can we make a difference? So this is so important. Like, they are so integral to reconciliation. Let
me try a bit of a question out of left field here.
Yes.
Humor me for a second. we live in strange times, right?
Yes.
There will be some who say, what's the white woman doing teaching Indigenous history to a bunch of non-Indigenous kids, right?
Absolutely.
How do you handle that kind of observation?
No, and this is part of the reason why we go up to the Woodland Cultural Center. This is why we bring in voices from the Indigenous community. And Stolen Lives also has those voices, because you're right. I am a white person. I'm a settler that's teaching this history, but I think it's so integral to make sure that we have those voices represented in the classroom. And when they come back and they've heard from a survivor, how could you not be moved? How could you not see this as one of the most important issues facing Canada today?
Leora, have you had any pushback from people who say, good motive, but you're not the right people to be teaching this stuff?
No, but I would say that we aren't the people teaching this. So, as Cheryl said, first of all, there are voices in this book. We don't speak in this book. It's many, many first-person accounts telling the story. So that's critical. The partnership with TED is critical. So when we came to the process of developing this resource, we knew that we had the skills and the strategies from all those 40 years of how to teach sensitive, controversial, complex histories in the classroom. We had that knowledge, but we knew we needed partners in the development from the get-go. And so we began building those partnerships. And without Theodore being involved, this resource really wouldn't have seen the light of day. It needed a partnership. It needed the voice. It needed. I personally needed the learning and the patience that Theodore brought to the process with me. So.
Theodore, are you content that it's okay to have people representing the so-called settler culture teaching your history in effect?
I'm quite okay with that. I've gone through in my own personal journey. I've crossed the line, if you want to say that, and it's part of our reconciliation path. Okay? I myself has married a white lady, and we've been together for over 30 years. And I didn't realize what I was doing. I'm sorry, apologize to my wife, but I didn't realize that it was part of my reconciliation, and. I now take it very, very seriously to realize what that meant. So, you must know, I was quite mixed up as a young man and growing up before my true reconciliation. I hated the white man. And so you asked me, why did you marry a white lady?
That was going to be my next question.
I think the path of reconciliation includes everything. It includes everything. And without realizing it, I fell in love with a white lady, and never thinking we would ever marry. But I did. We married. And anything that a person asks, what now? Reconciliation takes many paths. And sometimes you might get shocked of some of the things that are done in light of reconciliation. But that's what they are. Me sitting here is part of a major reconciliation. It's including now the education of Canadians of what really, really happened. And I really enjoy going into their classrooms. Still a little bit hesitant, still a little bit scared, but it's something now that at 72, 73, it's something that I must do. I have to tell people, as well as our own, that it's okay to reconcile to the fact of what happened to us.
This is your life's mission now.
Exactly.
Cheryl, I'm not sure it's possible to teach history in a completely generic, neutral, like it's always written by somebody, right?
Yes.
It always comes from somewhere. They say history is written by the victors, right?
Yes.
Can you teach something as difficult and controversial as this in a truly quote-unquote neutral fashion, or is it inevitable that this history gets politicized somehow?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't find, to be honest, that politics as such really come into it, because I think what we do is bring those kids in safely to this history and take them safely out. And we don't spend a lot of time too much on the politics. I mean, yes, the government policy, absolutely, we talk about that. But I think the students, what we all gravitate towards is the testimony, and then looking at the intergenerational impact of that today, because there are some that say, that happened how many decades ago? Let's move forward. So to be honest with you, I don't really find that it's that politicized. It's more about individual experience.
Okay, I don't know if the cameras caught this, so I'm gonna go here. You just grabbed something and you just patted his back. What just happened?
I get grounded. I have some symbols here. A symbol of my great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Nijute. And I go to my grandparents and my great-great-grandparents and for strength and a reassurance that I know what I'm doing is right.
Is the thing in your hand something you inherited from a grandparent or a great-grandparent?
Actually, it was inherited through a 12-year-old girl.
Show us. What is it? If you don't mind.
It's from the program called Hearts. Do you remember the name of the program? A Heart program that's taught across Canada.
And a 12-year-old girl made you that.
She heard my story, and I'm a Nijute. This is two hearts.
Mm-hmm.
When the priest and the government got a hold of my grandpa, Nijute, or Nijutins, which means small Nijute, they gave him an English name. Instead of keeping Nijute, they called them, Nijutins, they called them Two Heart. So that side of the family became Two Hearts. My mom became a Two Heart, and which means basically a double heart in our language, double heart, or maybe a twin. So I carry something that signifies who my great-grandfather was. And I feel some strength when I think about my great-grandfather. I feel very fortunate. I knew somebody that was born in 1865 and 1873. And I remember as a little guy remembering the conversations. And I get strength from knowing who they were. They were not quite at the stage of being ashamed of who they were, or the Indianness of them was not completely knocked out of them like it was with us as little boys in school. So I get very much strength on this. And this one here was given to me by an elder. Doesn't mean much. It's inanimate. It's a rock. It's a stone. But he said, anything you put into that stone comes back to you and only you. So there's certain messages in this stone that gives me the strength to be able to talk about. It's hard to talk about residential schools, but it's my purpose. But I can't do it alone. So I have, along with my partners here, my wife, this really gives me strength. It really does.
And you saw him grab that, and you knew that meant he needs some extra strength right now. So you gave him a pat on the back.
So we this morning we were at a school at the Toronto District School Board, and Theodore was speaking to students. And typically, when he speaks, his lovely wife Morgan sits beside him, but she's not here, and so I can't take that place. But I could see a dear friend needing something, so I did my best.
That was a lovely moment. Let's move on. Theodore, I don't know you well enough to call you Ted, so I'm going to call you Theodore, okay? I notice she calls you Ted, but that's okay.
I try to do both.
Thank you.
What faith do you have in our education system that we can remedy or improve all of this?
I never did. I never did. And I never envisioned me approaching the day that we could. But you know, the present situation in Canada is the real leadership is surfacing, where people are very, very serious and very, very adamant that they want to know what is the true history of our first people here in Canada. You know, I could go on a huge tangent here in identifying or commenting on the identity of Canada. And I think what's happening here with the help of my great friends and people around the country is they understand what is the real characteristic of Canada. You know, we're not going to lose it now. You know, we are. You know, it might sound unreal when I say, but we are the first characteristic of Canada. Our languages are reviving. I'm getting very, very good. You know, when we finish this, maybe I'll show you a couple bad words.
What language do you speak besides English?
Ojibwe. I almost lost Ojibwe, but of course you never lose it. You know, you're out in a big yard and you don't get caught speaking your language. So, you know, it revives itself. And it's fun. It's fun talking about it now. When we're at a meeting sometimes, and they think we're strategizing. If I'm sitting with a cousin or a friend, they think we're strategizing. But my goodness, we're talking about how bad the Leafs got beat. Or something.
How do you say that in Ojibwe? How do you say in Ojibwe the Leafs lost again? It's easier to say the Leafs lost again. Sadly, it's getting too much practice these days as well. Let me just I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Let me throw in this comment here from Jeffrey Simpson, who was writing about this in the Globe and Mail this past summer. And Jeffrey wrote, "This relentless focus on one aspect of the past could be salutary in the sense of knowing more and therefore making it less likely that the past will be forgotten. It might be useful, too, in helping to understand why some Aboriginal people today are broken individuals damaged by their experience in the schools. The focus is, however, part of a fixation on the past that can make future progress between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people more, not less, difficult." Okay, I want some reaction to this. Let's go down the line. Go ahead, Leora.
Well, you're talking to historians, right? Mm-hmm. So it would be, wouldn't you be shocked if we said we agreed with him?
I would not. I would be shocked if you said you agreed.
So of course, I mean, I think that we talked about this. We're the product of generations of people who did not learn this history, and I don't think we're doing that well. We're the test case, right? So let's try doing things differently. Let's ground our students in deeply learning, and it's through that knowledge that we can build relationships, honest relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians.
Cheryl, he uses the word fixation. Do you think there's a fixation by the settler culture and the Indigenous culture here to overdo the past and not look towards the future enough?
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, I found it interesting reading the article, this idea of fixation. There's lots of people, the fact that these students come to me at the age of 15 and haven't heard about this, to me indicates there's not a fixation by any means. And so I think it's important for these students to realize this was our history. If we're going to reconcile, if we're going to move forward, we have to deal with it. And it also, I think, helps to break down some of these negative stereotypes, right? It helps them understand this complex narrative of Canada. So I don't think you can actually have true reconciliation without truth. So it's not a fixation. If students are coming to us at 15 and have no idea about residential schools, or, I mean, I was out to dinner with friends a couple of weeks ago and they stopped me and said, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. What's the residential school system? So I think that...
How do you when somebody says to you,
yes.
I don't know what a residential school system is,
yes.
How do you react?
Do you know what? It's because of our education system. So I just, oh, okay. And then I just explain, like, this is what happened. And then there's that, again, same with our students, that
so
shock.
You don't try to humiliate them in front of everybody.
No. I feel it's not really how to keep friends. No. But that's the thing, right? So I feel like this learning is continuous for all Canadians. So I was really surprised, to be honest with you, with the word fixation. I thought, I think the opposite, to be very honest with you.
Go ahead, Theodore.
Well, if you would have asked me this question 15, 20 years ago, I think the table would be upside down. I have great respect for this man. I don't know too much of his writing. I've only recently started hearing about the talent that he has in telling a story, a news story. But I don't have any problems about having fixation. I want to be fixated on this. What happened to me? And what I must do in trying to repair this damage. And I don't care what anybody feels like, as long as they're aware that this did happen. And
I think his point, though, is that if there is an listen, he's going to speak for himself. I'm not speaking for him. I'm just trying to infer from the text that if there is an over-fixation on the past, it prohibits or prevents the kind of reconciliation and moving forward that he would like, you would like, everybody would like. I think that's his point.
Okay. The point is well taken, but I guarantee you, the fixation on this issue has to happen. Who are we in Canada if we're not cognizant of who we were when the immigrants first started coming in? You know, you go across the world and they don't know the character and the identity of Canada. You have to remember that first identity when Columbus landed here, it was our people, our languages. And we can't forget those. And I guarantee you, contrary to what this man thinks, it's not going to jeopardize that goal that we have. It's going to happen.
Let me understand more about that goal in our last few minutes here. Leora, these kinds of efforts.
Right.
Take us 25 years down the road. Take us 50 years down the road. What kind of impact would you hope that this would make, the results of which would be what?
Well, I'm going to quote Justice Marie Sinclair, the commissioner, the chief commissioner of the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He says, I think so smartly, that it is education or miseducation, but education that got us into this problem, and it's education that's going to get us out. So I would end by that, by saying that this resource, the students that are going to learn from this program and our work and our teachers, as well as the other efforts that are happening across the country, those are the future generations that are going to create change. And it's because of those students that are in our classrooms now that Canada will look different years ahead from today. And Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationships, the nation-to-nation building that we talk about needing so deeply in this country, that will change because of the education that students will begin to receive. And we're thrilled to be part of that process.
So tell me about your students. How are they going to reshape society 25 years from now as a result of what you're doing today? Well,
so there's this great little tidbit. So it's June, a parent comes into my classroom. Parents typically don't come into your classroom. You go down to the main office. And it's June, so I'm thinking, uh-oh, it's Mark related, right?
Can't be good,
Here
right?
we go, that's it. And then Mom pulls me aside and she's like, I want to thank you for teaching my son about Indigenous history. She's like, we're new to Canada. We've been here a few years. She's like, my son is super quiet, which was true. So sometimes you don't know what's happening in that mind of his. But she's like, I want to thank you because every night at the dinner table, he spoke about what he learned in your class. He spoke about going to the Woodland Cultural Center, and it has a huge impact on all of us. And so I just thought it's so empowering, so moving that, the history, these children are taking it home to their families, and then there's that ripple effect. Right? And this is what I think is so important. And even when we went last year to the residential school, They came back and they made these beautiful posters in the hallways. And yes, they had in it, they had the trauma of the residential school, the intergenerational impact, but then they also had upstanders in the community. They looked at all these, positive individuals like Gabrielle Scrimshaw and Wab Canoe and the survivors they just spoke to. But then they also did a big fundraiser for the First Nations Family and Caring Society. They also did a campaign for Save the Evidence to help rebuild the former residential school. So they want to be involved. So that's what I think, that's how we're going to bridge. That's how we're going to reconcile. And they're eager. They're so excited. Like I just said to Leora this morning, I just got an email from one of the students, and I mean, I'm not teaching at Peel this year, I'm with Facing History, and she's like, Miss Payne, did you see that there's going to be an inquiry into the missing Indigenous women? Right? So they've got that fire, and I think that fire is going to take us far, and they're the ones that are going to really shape Canada.
Last word to Theodore on this.
I just want to say one thing. We have we have an influx of new Canadians coming in. And traditionally, we have not made an effort to identify ourselves as what is the character of Canada. And I think with the influx of the new immigrants, we have an opportunity to be able to teach new immigrants from all parts of the world, to show them who we are. There's a lot of conflict that happens because of that lack of knowledge. And I think the reconciliatory path for all of us, and as well as Canadians, is to show them exactly what is the basic character of Canada. And I think we begin to get ourselves identified of who we are as the country of Canada.
I can't thank the three of you enough for coming in and sharing your views on this tonight. We're grateful to Leora Schaefer, Theodore Fontaine, and Cheryl Payne-Stevens. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.